Moscow, May 28, 1987, 6:43 in the evening. A plane just landed next to the Kremlin. Not a fighter, not a state aircraft, a Cessna, the kind of four-seater you rent on a Tuesday when you're learning to fly over cornfield. It rolled past St. Basil's Cathedral and stopped, right there, open ground, center of the capital. The pilot climbed out, 18 years old, sneakers, red flight jacket, 50 hours of total flight time. He had just flown 800 kilometers through the most fortified airspace on Earth, undetected, unchallenged, untouched. But here's the part nobody talks about. The Soviets saw him the entire time. Radar caught him at the border. Fighter jets found him mid-flight. Senior officers watched his blip crawl toward Moscow for hours. Nobody stopped him. Not because they couldn't, because the most powerful military machine ever built had developed a disease no radar can detect and no missile can stop. It had learned to hesitate. This is that story. And it's not about a brave teenager. It's about how empires die. Not in explosions, not in battle, in silence, while everyone waits for someone else to make the call. Before you can understand what Rust did, you need to understand what he flew into. Because calling it Soviet airspace is like calling the Pacific Ocean some water. PVO Strani, the Air Defense Command, was not a department. It was a civilization within a civilization. Hundreds of thousands of personnel. Radar coverage so dense it overlapped with itself. Surface-to-air missile systems, interceptor squadrons, underground command centers with their own power supplies, all of it integrated into a single, unified nervous system with one directive. Nothing enters. Ever. And they weren't pretending. 4 years before Rust climbed into his Cessna, Korean Airlines Flight 007 drifted off course during a commercial flight from Anchorage to Seoul. A 747. 269 people on board. It crossed into Soviet airspace near Sakhalin Island. A Soviet interceptor crew received authorization and fired. The plane went into the ocean. No survivors. No warnings issued. No hesitation. The international reaction was volcanic. Condemnations from every direction, photographs of the families, speeches at the United Nations. The Soviets were unmoved. Their position was architectural, not political. The airspace boundary is the boundary. You cross it, the system responds. The system does not negotiate. NATO military planners ran their own analysis in the aftermath. Their conclusion, formally documented, was essentially this: unauthorized penetration of Soviet airspace by any aircraft, even a fast, low observable military platform, carried survival odds approaching zero. The coverage was too layered, the response too rehearsed. That assessment was published in 1984. 36 months later, a teenager in a propeller plane from Hamburg made it obsolete. Hamburg, winter 1986. Mathias Rust was not a spy, not a daredevil, not a prodigy pilot with a military background and a death wish. He was 18, recently licensed to fly, and unable to stop thinking about what had just happened in Iceland. October 1986. Reagan and Gorbachev met in Reykjavik. They came within hours, genuinely within hours, by accounts from people inside the room, of eliminating every nuclear weapon on the planet. Then it collapsed. Over a single clause in a single document. They shook hands. They went home. The weapons stayed. Rust watched from Germany and arrived at a conclusion that was either visionary or completely insane. If the most powerful men alive couldn't close the gap, maybe someone unexpected could cross it. He would fly to Moscow, alone, and land somewhere the world couldn't look away from. He told almost no one. He rented a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, the most forgettable aircraft commercially available, slower than most highway traffic, and started training quietly over the North Sea. At the rental desk, a few weeks before departure, the clerk looked at his logbook. 50 hours. Hamburg to Helsinki would already be the longest solo flight of his life.
Planning something special?
Rust picked up his keys.
Just some navigation practice.
What he didn't realize was that everything making his plan look suicidal was actually protecting him. He was too slow to match a threat profile, too small to track confidently, too unremarkable to take seriously. A system built to stop weapons couldn't process something that didn't look like one. Helsinki, May 28, 1987. Early afternoon. Rust filed a flight plan to Stockholm. Routine, unremarkable. The kind filed 1,000 times daily across northern Europe. He took off, then turned east. He dropped to 600 meters and held it, low enough to blur into ground clutter on radar returns designed to catch ballistic missiles and supersonic jets. Not a lawnmower at 226 kilometers per hour. He switched off his transponder. No civilian signal. On military radar, he became a faint smear. There, then gone, then there again. At 2:21 in the afternoon, he crossed into Soviet territory. He was now inside the thing NATO had concluded was suicidal to enter, and the first alarm hadn't sounded yet. Failure 1. The system. An Estonian border radar station caught him almost immediately. The report moved up the chain. The machinery activated. For 4 minutes, everything worked. Then the operators looked at what they had and hit a wall. The contact didn't fit any threat profile in the catalog. Military aircraft don't cruise at 600 meters at 226 kilometers per hour. Neither do reconnaissance planes. Neither do missiles. So the system did what it was trained to do. It generated alternatives. Birds, weather, sensor drift, calibration artifact, not incompetence, something worse. A system trained to aggressively suppress false positives, because false alarms in Soviet military culture didn't just embarrass you, they ended careers, had taught itself to explain away anything that didn't match a known template. Rust didn't match a known template. Contact downgraded. He flew another 100 kilometers while the assessment worked through the bureaucracy. Failure 2. The pilot. A second station reacquired the contact. Same track, same speed, same wrongness. Protocol kicked in. 2 Sukhoi Su-15 interceptors scrambled from a nearby base. These were not escort aircraft. These were weapons platforms. Mach 1.5, air-to-air missiles. The same type that had processed Flight 007. One of the pilots found Rust. He came alongside the Cessna. White fuselage, single engine, 1 occupant. Young. He could see everything. The civilian registration markings, the rental plane configuration. The kid inside who didn't even turn to look at him. And here's where the second failure lives. Quieter than the first, and more damning. The Su-15's minimum airspeed approaches 300 kilometers per hour. Rust was flying at 180. The interceptor couldn't hold formation long enough to execute the standard challenge and warn sequence. Every time the pilot slowed, the aerodynamics of a supersonic fighter started complaining loudly. He could find Rust. He could see Rust. He could not control the encounter. He made one pass, keyed his radio, and reported what little he could confirm.
Small civilian aircraft, single engine, 1 occupant, unable to maintain formation.
And the contact was downgraded again. Rust flew another 200 kilometers. Failure 3. The commander. This is the one that matters. An air defense unit escalated the contact urgently enough that it reached a senior commander directly. He read the report. He understood exactly what it described. He sat on it. The math was simple and catastrophic. Escalate, and if it's a false alarm, career damage is immediate. Escalate, and if it triggers another civilian shootdown, with Flight 007 still raw in global memory, career damage is permanent. The safest move for him was to not be the person who made the call, so he didn't. Not a radar failure, not a technology gap. A person at the apex of the chain who optimized for personal safety over institutional purpose. And that one decision let an 18-year-old in a rented Cessna fly the final 200 kilometers to Moscow while the entire Soviet air defense network watched. 6:30 in the evening. Rust is over Moscow. 6 hours in the cockpit, fuel running toward reserve. By his own account, he felt less afraid at this point than he had sitting in Helsinki 3 days earlier, trying to decide whether to go at all. He had planned to land inside the Kremlin grounds. The symbolism was clean. The courtyard dimensions were workable. Then, he thought it through. If he landed inside the walls, the security apparatus would be on him before the dust settled. Confiscated, arrested quietly, officially denied. The story ends in a detention room instead of a headline. He needed the thing to be witnessed. He circled the square once and immediately encountered the problem. A crowd of thousands, completely filling the surface. Landing there meant landing on someone, possibly several people. He pulled up, kept circling. He found the Bolshoi Moskvoretsky Bridge, wide, mostly clear, a straight approach path over the river. He set up his descent. At 6:43 in the evening, the wheels contacted stone. He rolled across the bridge. He taxied past the cathedral walls, past Lenin's tomb, past the layered facades of 1,000 propaganda photographs. He stopped, cut the engine, got out. The silence, by multiple accounts from witnesses, lasted several seconds. A crowd had gathered. Nobody ran, nobody screamed. This was a city in which unexpected things simply did not happen. And when something genuinely unprecedented appears, the first response is often just to stare. Then a man at the front of the crowd spoke up.
"Where did you come from?"
West Germany.
The man stared for a moment. Then he laughed. Not nervously, but with the sudden release of someone who has just witnessed something they will never be able to adequately explain. People asked for autographs. He signed them. 90 minutes later, the KGB arrived and stood around the aircraft looking at it with an expression that could be described, charitably, as institutional confusion. 70 years of Soviet power had produced procedure for nearly everything. It had not produced procedure for this. They arrested him. He didn't resist. He was 18 years old, standing next to a rental plane in the center of Moscow. And the most extraordinary thing about the scene was how completely ordinary he seemed. Gorbachev got the call in East Berlin. He asked for confirmation. It came. He went quiet. Then he asked about his generals. Not about the boy. Not about the plane. Who knew? When? Why wasn't it stopped? Because Gorbachev understood immediately what this actually was. Not a crisis. A weapon, pointed directly at the people who had been blocking him for 2 years. Here's the context. Gorbachev had been fighting a grinding internal war since taking power. Glasnost, perestroika, a controlled modernization effort to make the Soviet system survivable before it collapsed on its own. The military establishment had been killing it quietly at every level. Senior generals, defense hardliners, men whose entire identities were built around the old architecture, secrecy, rigidity, institutional paranoia. They slowed every initiative, buried every proposal, and they did it with the credibility of people running the largest defense budget in human history. Rust had just destroyed that credibility, publicly, irreversibly, in front of the entire world. Within days, Gorbachev moved. Defense Minister Sokolov, removed. Commander of Air Defense, removed. Over 300 senior officers, dismissed, demoted, erased. The largest military purge since Stalin. Every major figure who had spent 2 years obstructing reform lost their position inside a single week. Their replacements were loyalists, people who would move. For the first time, Gorbachev had the internal leverage to actually govern. The reforms accelerated. The pressure built. The Baltic states pushed. Then Georgia. Then everywhere. 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Historians still argue about causation, whether Rust accelerated the collapse or just exposed something already terminal, whether the purge changed the outcome of the '91 coup attempt. But the sequence is documented. A teenager crossed Soviet airspace in May of 1987. The men blocking reform were gone within a week. 4 years later, so was the Union. Rust was convicted, sentenced to 4 years. He served 14 months, released as a diplomatic gesture when Reagan and Gorbachev signed an arms treaty. He went home. He became briefly famous. Then the biography got complicated. 2 years later, a separate criminal conviction. The story doesn't end cleanly. It never does. But here's what the story is actually about. The Soviet air defense network saw Mathias Rust from the moment he crossed the border. Their radar tracked him. Their pilots found him. Their commanders read the reports. Nobody stopped him. Not because the system failed, because every person inside it had learned, through years of accumulated institutional pressure, to treat personal safety as the primary variable in every decision. The system didn't malfunction. It performed exactly as its incentives had trained it to. 500,000 people, $100 billion in infrastructure, 4 decades of construction, stopped by a teenager flying slower than highway traffic because not one person inside the entire apparatus was willing to be the one responsible. That's not a story about one flight. That's a story about what happens to every institution that confuses size with strength and learns to protect itself instead of its purpose. It doesn't announce when that transformation happens. You only find out afterward, when the Cessna lands.